Story time with Stephanie.
Welcome to the show. I'm Stephanie Storey. This is my show, Story Time. And my guest today, I just love as a human being, so I was so happy that he would come on just as an excuse to chat away for a little while. He is, to me, all things writing, right? He has a master's degree in journalism from Berkeley. He's written for magazines and newspapers and online. He's written books, Dungeons and Dreamers, which is about the sort of computer gaming. But he's also the editorial director of Carnegie Mellon University's ETC Press and the University Libraries. And he's the host of Downtown Writers Jam, which is where I met him when I bum rushed his show. So welcome to the show, Brad King.
Thank you. That was good. You got it all. That's pretty good.
I worked on it. I was like rehearsing it today. I was walking around. Like, what all has he done? He's done 8,000 things.
Yeah.
Okay, but this is the reason why I really wanted to have you here, because this is the question I wanted to ask. I am obsessed with people who are really passionate and obsessed with things. Those are the people that I'm drawn to, and I want to know more about, and I want to understand. And out of all the people in the world that I know, you are fascinated and passionate about other writers. You're a writer, you edit their work, you interview them. People at home don't know this. He hosts like random happy hours where he just gets writers together and enjoys like pairing them off. And it's crazy. Do you know where your obsession with either writers in general, since you are one, or with other writers comes from? Do you know where that?
Yeah. I've thought a lot about this over the years. So I grew up in a small town, a small little Appalachian town. There's about 5,000 people there, and my mom read. My mom always read, and so I was reading from a very early age, and it was a passageway for me out of that place. I love Appalachia. That you know this about me. Like I'm very passionate about that. My family's been there for 350 years, but I always felt like I didn't fit in where I was at, and so reading books. I started in science fiction, and then like I read every Nancy Drew book, and then I read all the Hardy Boys books, and then I started just reading literature. And A Separate Peace by Jonathan Knowles was like one of the most influential books that I ever read. And then I found Fitzgerald, like all as a kid. And it was this sort of, I began to understand this world, even though I was in this small place. I began to understand that there were other people out there that were like me, that there were other people out there that struggled with these things, and these feelings that I had inside me were not odd and not weird, and that if I could connect here, that leaving and going out into the world wasn't going to be scary. And so, to a large extent, words gave me the ability to leave and the ability to go explore and do things. When I didn't have any mentors, I didn't have parents that did that kind of stuff. Like there wasn't anything in my life, and people who know me and have known me forever have always said like, how did that happen? And I'm like, I just sort of did it because I didn't know what else to do. I had to leave, and books sort of gave me that entryway out there. And because they had shaped and formed me so much and given me a sense that the world was something bigger than I knew, but not scary big, that I think stuck inside of me and has just become, I mean, it has been a passion of mine since I was 5 years old. I have everything I've ever written in a folder, like in folders, like from the time I was like 8 years old.
You've never gotten rid of any of it.
No, I have short stories and poems, like even the emo poems, like, all that, all the humiliating stuff like I got, because it was, I always tell people words are precious to me, but they are not precious, right? Like I think words should be for everybody. Like it shouldn't just be for people that have MFAs or people that, are craftsmen and things like that. Words are beautiful in all of their different ways, except when there's Nazis and bastards like that, like then they don't get to use them. But like for the rest of us, it's so important. And my undergraduate degree is in early childhood education. I was a middle school teacher. And one of the things that we know is the way in which you learn is by writing. Like that is the way in which your brain encodes things, because it takes it from abstract thought. You have to summarize that thought and then make it concrete. So it's not the actual writing, it's the process of writing that makes you learn. And the process of reading allows you to develop empathy. That's humanity. I mean, that's what it's about.
So is that the reason why? Because a lot of people who like want to escape through stories, like my husband escaped through television. A lot of people got that escapism through film. I know a lot of people who did that. I'm like you, I got it through books. Is it because of what you're talking about with it was a way to process and learn that your escape or your imagination, that it came through the particular form of storytelling and escapism through books or words?
You know, I don't know. I know that writing is how you process things. Like that is how humans process emotions, because it is the act of taking an abstract thing and making it concrete, right? Like that is how we process stuff. And the premise of the show, the reason that I do the podcast, and I always tell people, is that I think people become writers because they're trying to figure out a question. And the question isn't always directly addressed in the book, but they are trying to figure something out. Writers, by definition, everybody that I've ever talked to, all of my friends are writers. Like I've been doing this for a long time. They are all curious about how a thing works, and they want to deconstruct it because there's something about that deconstruction that they need to understand inside of them, right? They're trying to understand that thing. So I think that I gravitated to, I'm a nonfiction writer. I can't write. Every time I try to do, I've written a couple decent short films, I think, but the directors have always said like, these are super wordy. And I'm like, yeah, you got it. And so for me, it's deconstructing stuff. Like I love deconstructing people's stories and helping them see why they are the way they are. Because that's the point of all of this. That's the point of all of this, is to help people find their identity and find their voice, and to like nurture that, and what a gift it is to go through that process. And that allows me to see new things, and that allows me to experience new things as other people find their voices and find their place. Like what a gift.
So as you're helping other people deconstruct their stuff on your podcast, and I'm sure through editing other people's work and through telling other people's stories in nonfiction, are you learning something about yourself along the way? And what are you learning about yourself along the way?
Yeah, I mean, the most recent, I mean, it happens every time I read a book, right? I just got Yaa Gyasi's new book, Transcendent Kingdom. She wrote Homegoing. And Homegoing, if you haven't read it, is about two sisters on the Gold Coast at the beginning of slavery. One gets taken as a slave and one doesn't. And every chapter is one of their descendants all the way to modern times. And you know, I had to stop reading that in public because I was like weeping uncontrollably, because what a powerful way to tell the story of slavery, right? Like what a powerful story. And it tells it in a complete, I say complete, but like it tells it from many different viewpoints, both from the tribes, from the British, and from the Americans, and from the legacy of post-slavery, right? Like it is this fascinating thing. And so I always tell people, I like to think of myself as a progressive person, but every time you read a thing that's from a viewpoint that's not yours, you're going to be challenged on something. And you have two choices. The first choice is to make your world very small and say, no, nothing that you say is going to get in here. And you spend your whole life pushing back against forces that are going to push against you, and your life will get very small. Or you can say, yes, let me step out here and let me make this world bigger. And I may not understand it. I may not be at the center of it. I may not like the way that it goes, but what a gift to have a life that's big as opposed to a life that's small. And that's the process for me when I try to actively seek out at this point stories that I think will be different than mine, because I want a big life, because I tried to live a small life for a long time. I didn't know it, but I tried to do that, and it's miserable and it's awful. And it doesn't work for anybody.
But so you're in this small town, and you could have gotten trapped in that. You really could have gotten trapped in that world. When was the first time that you started traveling outside of it? When you started, not just through books, physically leaving and going to do other things? How old were you?
Well, my parents were square dancers, and so they actually traveled around, particularly the South, with this group of square dancers. So we would go to like Fontana Village, and you know, that was what we would do. We would camp and they would dance. I did a little bit of calling. I did one called Pickle Up a Doodle in the Middle of the Day. But I would, yeah. So like we would do that. So that like as a kid, like the stuff that we did, I always tell people it was like dirty dancing for hillbillies. Like we would go to these little like communities and, but we were around a bunch of people that looked like and sounded like us. The first time I really started, and I traveled a little bit with baseball because I was a good baseball player on a good baseball team. But again, you're around it. That's an isolated or insulated place. The first time I really started traveling was in college. I used to get in my car and I wanted to be a writer. So I would find weekly newspapers across the country and I would call the editors and say I was coming through town and could I have lunch? And I would get in my car and drive. I would just skip school for like 2 weeks at a time and drive. I would sleep in my car in truck stops and roll into these towns and have lunches with editors at like alt weeklies across the country, developing a Rolodex because I didn't know any other way to do it. Right. Like I didn't know how to become a writer. I didn't know. And so I thought, well, you have like, this is my solution to how to do that. And so, yeah, like I was sleeping in my car in truck stops and, taking the showers, doing all the stuff that you do. And then I'd roll back into college a couple weeks later and catch up with everything. And
that is extraordinary to me that you did it and you went, well, I don't know what else to do. So I guess I got to go meet people. So I'll just go start driving around and checking in with people and meeting them. You had to have learned just out of your own accord of getting in that car and driving. You had to have learned lessons that still pay off to this day.
The thing that I have learned is that I can get out of anything, like no matter what dire circumstances show up, out of work, whatever, like I'm not above any job. I'm not above anything. Like I know if push comes to shove, like I can figure something out because, when you're a poor kid from the middle of nowhere, it's a fun story that I tell people now, but I also tell them like that was born out of fear. Like that nobody does that because of a sense of adventure. Like I needed to get out and I didn't know how to get out. And the alternative was to never get out. And so lacking anybody helping me figure out how to do that, I thought, well, I'm just going to start going as fast as I can. And it was good in the beginning. But, about 4 years ago, everything fell apart because when you run that long, I never learned how to stop running. I never learned how to feel comfortable with success because to me, the original vaulting point was fear. And so that's, I've been in therapy we've talked about this. I've been in therapy for the last 3.5 years, like trying to get myself to calm down and go, you've made it enough and you'll be okay. So you're not that kid anymore.
You can exhale. You can relax a little.
Yeah.
Although I don't know if that ever goes away. Whatever it is that's chasing you from the time you were young. I think we all have those things, particularly writers. We all have those things that are chasing us from childhood.
Yeah.
But we're never going to outrun and we're never going to solve. To your point, we're always going to be asking those same questions somehow over and over again.
I will say therapy has been really good and I have a lot of tools at my disposal now and I feel actually more settled than I've ever been before. And I tell everybody all the time, like, I do Olympic lifting to keep my body in shape. I read to keep my soul in shape and I go to therapy to keep my mind in shape because those three things working together only work if you're doing all the work on all three of them. And I will say it has changed my writing. I haven't written much in the last few years. I have this book so far, Appalachia, that I just threw in the garbage can because it wasn't sitting. There was a part of it that wasn't sitting right. There was like 85% there, but there was 15% that wasn't. And I needed to go through this therapy. I needed to get calm because I had written that book out of fear. And that book is not about fear. That book is about something else. So I do actually think you can. I don't know if you ever get away from it, but it doesn't have to be the master of you.
Now that you've pushed aside the book that you've worked on for years.
Yeah. I'm working on it. Like I'm actively working on it. Yeah.
But it is actively changing under your feet.
Yeah.
So where are you going with your writing now? Do you have new sets of questions that are driving you since going through this personal break? Is it the same set of questions? It's just shifted Same set of questions.
Same set of questions. So I read Michelle Falavino's book, Tomboyland. I had her on the program, and we bonded. Like, she is like a sister. Like, she is somebody that's going to be in my life till the day I die. And we got off the phone and we're like, well, this is ridiculous. Like, we lived the same lives. We did the same things, all of this stuff. And her memoir is a book of essays, and it's about growing up in a small town in Wisconsin. It's also about being queer. It's also about BDSM. It's also about sort of what does it mean to find your identity and to feel comfortable in your own skin. Everything from a small town. What does it mean to be a small town to do that? All the way through her journey through this stuff. And I sat on the couch reading the book after the interview and was in tears. And in tears, one, because I just thought, like, God, the pain of not having a world make you feel comfortable with who you are, that was just too much for me to bear, right? And so all of the sort of things of being a white man in the country, and like, as much as I like to think I'm progressive, I'm like, clearly I have been part of this problem, even if I think I'm not. And like, how does that not impact you? And also, I read there were parts of the book that were really hard for me to read, that really, as a straight male guy, was just like, it made me uncomfortable, despite the fact that, like, there's no reason that it should. And that made me be interested. That, like, I sent her a note and I'm like, what a gift that you have helped shine a light on a thing that's wrong with me, not with you. Like, your book is about who you are. And that's helped me see where I have work to do. And like, what a gift. And that was when I realized I originally had written my memoir as essays, and then I thought I needed to turn it into a book, and it never worked as a book, because the beautiful thing about Tomboyland, the beautiful thing about her essays, is that every essay is about one thing, and it takes this really deep, smart look through this beautiful person into her life, and through that, you have a chance to examine yourself. And I'm like, this is what I had originally set out to do. And I got caught up in the JD Vance, the idea that we have to write these books about that are stories instead of books that are about things. So that for me is where the writing has gone, right? Is that it's like, no, I am much better at finding one thing and going into that. Like, that's how my mind works. That's how I work. And I need to forget this other, like, narrative nonfiction stuff.
But why as writers? Because you come at it from 8 different ways, as I've said. You come at it from writer, you come at it from editor, you come at it from fan and reader, right?
Yeah.
Why do we as writers get so caught up in what we're supposed to be writing? In, like, what it's supposed to look like, instead of what the story and what you're actually trying to accomplish? We all do it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
We all eat ourselves alive with it.
Yeah. And I am not particularly part of the literati. Like, I know a lot of people. Like, my superpower will always be, to the day I die, if we go anywhere where there's writers, there's a good chance that many of them know who I am, even though none of them know anything I've written, because I will be their cheerleader. And I'm a writer's writer. Like, I'm that comic that only comics like, right? I'm that writer that only writers like. And I forget that sometimes, because when I started this, like every other writer, I'm like, I'm going to be the voice of my generation, right? And then I'm like, my generation's kind of a bunch of assholes. Like, I don't really feel like any of us are the voice of anything, right? And so as I was doing the essays, I was like, no, this has to be, and literally I said this, which is the dumbest thing in the world, this has to be a book. It can't be essays. It has to be a book, right? Because we privilege certain kinds of things as books and not as other, which is 180 degrees opposite of anything that I do. And I, did it to myself.
Terrifying or liberating or both, to look at it and go, oh my gosh, I'm going back to where I started, and maybe I just should have, like, do you know what I mean? Like is there a mental hang up with it, or are you like, nah, that's great, that's part of the process?
Words are precious, but they're not precious.
Oh, we're back to that.
Yeah, I mean, like, at the end of the day, like, we go through the process that we need to go through. I can't look at the process that I went through and go, well, that's, it hurt. It actually felt really good, because that finished book, I didn't want it out. And I couldn't figure out why. And I'm pretty smart with word stuff. And I'm like, why can't I figure out the code for what this is? And it took reading somebody else who was just like me, who I bonded with, who wrote this gorgeous thing that did everything that I wanted my book to do. And I thought, yeah, Melissa, that's the way through. Thank you. Like, again, what a gift.
But now you do run a small press at Carnegie Mellon University, and you are helping to birth other people's books and helping them do that. That now, I mean, it feels like like, absolutely, of course you do this.
Yeah.
How did it feel to finally get in there, and how does it feel to do that versus birthing your own story? What's the difference, and how does it feed what you're doing?
Yeah, and writers will get this. At heart, I'm a writer. And so it's a little painful to do anything that's not writing. But I'm Salieri, right? Like, I understand that I'm not Mozart. I didn't understand that for a long time. And so once I came to the acceptance that I am good on the level that I'm good at, and that's okay. Like, like the idea of trying to punch above that. Sure, if I write this and it does well, great. But that's not the goal anymore, which is a terrible goal to have anyway. Once I sort of settled into that and said, okay, what do I actually do well? What I do well is edit. And what I do well is use new technologies to publish things, is to help people get projects out in the way that they want them to get them out. I've been working with Carnegie for, I think, 13 years, last 3 years full time. But I started off as a volunteer and sort of worked my way up till we built this thing into a publishing house that Carnegie funded. So I like building stuff around publishing just because, I did it at Technology Review. I built one of the first online news organizations that made money. Like, I know how to do it. I've been online since I was 12 in 1984. So that, when I look at like, where am I the Mozart? That's kind of where I'm the Mozart. I'm really good at that. And it's not my favorite thing, but it helps people who are better writers than me. And that's not a bad place to be, My dad was a sort of an upper level middle manager at the end of his career. And he used to tell me, the most important part of managing is put things in place, hire smart people, and make sure that nobody gets in their way. And I feel like my job is to plow some of the things in front of writers that don't understand the sort of indie or small publishing, and say, you don't have to do any of that. Like, we'll do that. We got that. And I feel good every time the book comes out and you get that email from somebody and they're like, oh my God, like, how did this happen? I'm like, yeah, it's great. And we're doing a lot of experimental stuff. And because we're at a university, we're what we call gold open access. There is a free version of every book that we do, because Pittsburgh is the northern sort of industrial hub of Appalachia, which is part of why I came here. So part of my mission is to make sure that all of this stuff is accessible to people. And the only way you can do that is if you make it free. Now, certainly you need some device to download the PDF, but if that's the barrier to entry, like, I can't fix the last mile. I can only fix that we make free versions available, including my book. Despite having there be a free version of it, we sold 10,000 copies of D&D. Like, that ain't bad.
No, that's impressive. I mean, yeah. Most books do not sell 500 copies. So yeah. You left your hometown. I mean, you did. You got out of Appalachia, but you are still so passionate about that part of the country and your roots. And a lot of people who leave, like, reject it. I certainly did. I'm sheltering in place back in Arkansas, but like, I left and I went to Hollywood and I was like, see you later, Arkansas.
I didn't fit in California. I tried. I didn't fit in.
I don't necessarily feel that way now as I'm getting older, but certainly you've stayed obsessed with the region. Yeah. Why was it to answer questions about yourself, or was it to why did you stay so connected?
So this is a complicated answer that I don't know if I know all the parts. So I'll give you the parts that I know. So I didn't know that my family was famous until I was 30, because my branch of the Baker family from Clay County, many of them had been killed And so like my grandmother's generation fled. My great grandfather was the last one killed in this 100-year war. History Channel did a documentary on it, which is how I found out about it. So there had always
it was like a feud. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, well, it was 100-year. I mean, it's 100-year. 130 people were killed. Like it was less of a. It was more about money and land and sort of shrinking resources between these two rich families as they were pushing back against the 9 families in Lexington, the center of Kentucky, that owned most of the mineral rights throughout the state. Popularly, people call these feuds, right?
Yeah.
Because we're very bad at explaining, like, well, here's the socio-political stuff that led to the 100-year war where people were getting murdered on a regular basis. And so my family is very, very small, but also very tight. And that even if you don't see anybody, if a family member shows up, you don't ask questions. You just, and that always was like, that was always sort of silently part of my childhood. And so there is this pull that I have of family, of roots. If you go to Crane Creek, where my family founded Clay County in 1804, the same families that were there in 1804 are still on that road. If you go to Upper Crane Creek, where the whites were, the same families are still there. Now, we grew up in Ohio because we escaped. We just across the border. So I think there's that. This invisible thing that I didn't know that was there, that was being put on me without me knowing the whole history of it. Then, like Bell Hooks, I went to Berkeley, right? She went to Stanford. I went to Berkeley. Bell Hooks is from a small town in Kentucky. And suddenly everybody, and I went to Texas first. And all of a sudden I'm out in California. I'm at Berkeley. I'm working at Wired. And there wasn't a day that went by that somebody didn't ask me about my accent. Not a day. Not a day. I'd call people on the phone and they'd be like, where are you from? Are you from Louisiana? And I'm like, Louisiana? What are you talking about? Like, I don't sound anything like, have you been anywhere in Appalachia? Like, what's wrong with you people? And that really, and, you know, as a poor kid who had to fight to get into these places and seeing a bunch of like upper class kids show up, the class thing suddenly hit me. And then this sort of, I didn't wear cowboy hats for years. I didn't wear cowboy boots for years because I would do that. I showed up my first day at Berkeley in a black leather duster and a black cowboy hat and cowboy boots. And, you know, people were like, what the hell is this? And I'm like, I mean, you all look funny, you know, like, I don't really know what you guys are doing. And it made me really think about my identity, and it made me really start to study it and read books about it, because it wasn't ever communicated, because again, we had sort of escaped. So my parents didn't really make that a part of my life. And so I had to come to that later. And as I've done that, and as I've come to know my family history, we have our family history back to the 1300s. We had the first gunsmithing, we ran the first gunsmithing shop in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is home of the Kentucky Long Rifle, which is the gun that was used in the Revolutionary War. Like, that is why we came over here. You start to realize that, and I'm like, okay, there is this rich history, and there is this family thing where people don't leave, and I have been removed from that sort of second generation without knowing it. And so there's part of me that's never really felt home. Like, coming to Pittsburgh is the first time I felt like, oh, it's a blue city, right? We have arts, we have mountains. I can wear a cowboy hat, cowboy boots. Nobody thinks that's weird. Like, nobody talks about my accent, you know, like, I just sort of get the culture. And we've talked about this. It is imperative that people like me come back to this region, because there's literally not anybody that has more bona fides than I do about this area. And it needs to be people like me that come back and talk to these folks who feel abandoned and who have gone to authoritarian people who are playing on them, right? Because if other people come in, good, well-meaning Democrats come in, right? Like, that's not going to go over well.
No.
Yeah.
It's too tribal in a way. Like,
well, and you know, my book is a lot about like how, like, the Democrats are the ones that ruined central and northern Appalachia. Like, they stole the money. Like, the reason people don't trust them in that area, because these families haven't left, and the people that were in charge when all of this stuff went left was the left, right? And so you can't just pop in and be like, we're going to help you, because they're like, we've heard this story before. But I can go back.
Yeah.
And not anybody can say anything to me. And beyond that, physically, I am safe to do that in a way that a woman or a person of color is not safe to do that, even if they're from there. So, that's been a big reason why I came back. It was just like, yeah, no, this is the calling. This is the mission.
We are in the middle, obviously. I'm taping this now. I probably won't air it for a couple weeks, but in the middle of just a crazy moment in our history, in American history, between COVID and the racial protests coming up around all of the police incidents this spring and summer. You can't even just put it on the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, that's what we're talking about. All of this and this giant election that is coming up. How is it changing? Are people's opinions changing in your proverbial neck of the woods? I don't see it changing in Arkansas necessarily. But is it changing where you are? And do you see where the people from Appalachia, people from smaller towns, poor towns who've been stuck in the systemic poverty are going to be able to move forward with increased diversification? Or is it just making them fearful and freak out and close the windows tighter,
that frame of a question is always so odd to me, because college educated white women voted for, suburban white women voted for this guy, right? So like, are they going to there's a lot of people that have to like make this change. And the tidal wave in Appalachia started 300 years ago, right? Like, and so there's not going to be any one election that changes anything. There needs to be systemic changes where you see real progress and movement. And I thought really through Clinton and Bush and Obama that transforming that region from coal mining into sort of a modern economy, there was a real momentum there. And I fear that the last 4 years have stopped that momentum. Doesn't mean that it can't start again. And we'll be starting at a higher ground than we were before. But I don't particularly think it's a Democratic or a Republican answer. It needs to be a federal government. And the Appalachian Regional Commission, which this guy in office wants to defund. The Appalachian Regional Commission, which was formed in 1965, after the Eisenhower freeway was put in, or highway system was put in, and began to move the state routes out of being the primary way people got around, they formed this 13-state regional commission to build economic corridors. It's why Nashville is built up now. It's why you see these corridors building. And they made some dubious decisions that I think were bad, but at least one of the 4 tenets was we need to build an economic corridor, because if we make Nashville a place, if we make Pittsburgh a place, that will grow the region around it. It's the only way this happens. It was made in 1965. You've seen sort of ups and downs as presidents and Congresses have sort of said, well, we don't like these commissions or whatever, but you can't look at least central and northern Appalachia and see like, well, when they've done it, there's actually been some stuff that happened. And I get apolitical only in that place, because those regional commissions are literally what the state governments are doing right now, because this guy won't do anything with COVID, right? When New York and Pennsylvania and New Jersey all get together and say, we're going to form a regional commission, that's what the ARC is. And those things work. So for me, it's less about, look, if this guy is in office again, the country's over as we know it. I am 100% convinced of that. Like, we will never come back from that. Yeah. Biden's not going to come in and suddenly fix everything, but he will at least return some of the norms. And I think that probably Appalachia will be part of what they do, which is reconstituting the Appalachian Regional Commission. And it's always weird when I talk about that. I'm like, 5 people know about the ARC, and I'm like, it's the most important thing about the development of that region. And everybody that talks about coal miners and stuff, I'm like, you don't know anything about what you're talking about if that is the emphasis of what you think this discussion is about. Because if you give people economic opportunity, if you allow them to make sustainable businesses, if you allow them to have communities that are sustainable, because they're not, because so many of the resources have been taken from them, so they have no ability to build new things. If you return that, people end up as Democrats. I just believe that, because once you start building those things, you have the ability to then have empathy. If you're worried about your job, your food, your kids, you don't have the ability. It's really hard to get past that on Maslow's hierarchy of being, to be self-actualized when you're worried if your kids are going to eat.
And that's why I love talking to people like you, because so passionate, so knowledgeable, so opinionated, and just down the rabbit hole with some topic that I don't know anything about, that I want to know more about, that I'm completely ignorant about, that I want to learn about from someone who cares about it as much as you do, which I love.
Yeah, I mean, it's why I love writers. It's why I do the show. I spend about 15 hours a week on the Downtown Writers Jam. It's not paid. Like, I don't, we're growing, but right now it's been a passion project forever. And I tell everybody who's on the program, it's the best part of my day when I interview people, because I love their stories. Every time I hear somebody's story, it makes my life bigger.
Oh, okay. I'm ending on that. I'm ending on every time you hear somebody's story, it makes your life bigger, because that's what matters, man.
Yeah.
We've got time and plenty of stories, talking stories in a novel way. Story time with Stephanie Storey.